Before anything else, I want you to do something simple. Answer the next 7 questions quietly in your mind. Don't overthink them. Just notice your honest response and keep track of how many times you say yes. Because if 5 or more of these feel true for you, you're not just noticing random coincidences. You may be responding to signals. In the language we use here, that places you inside a specific frequency corridor, one that carries what we call the signature of Sophia Hochmatt. Have you recently gone through a short, unexplained wave of illness, mild fever, mental fog, or flu-like fatigue that lasted only a few days and then disappeared without a clear medical diagnosis? Have coincidences started arriving in clusters, with 3 or more unlikely events lining up at once, almost as if doors you needed suddenly opened together? Have old fears, sudden anxiety, or unresolved shame resurfaced with unusual intensity, not randomly, but as if something were quietly testing your sense of safety? Has your sleep changed, with awakenings at strange hours, vivid instructional dreams, or the feeling that your nights have turned into something closer to lessons than rest? Do you feel a persistent urgency, a pressure that something needs to be done now, as if a real window of opportunity is open but won't stay open forever? Have you been drawn, almost without knowing why, to crystals, emerald green tones, spheres, lattices, or specific geometric forms that seem to calm or energize you? And finally, have you noticed a subtle inner shift, where you ask fewer questions outwardly and feel more quiet certainty inwardly, a sense of becoming a source rather than just a receiver? Before we go deeper, if you want guided activation content and step-by-step practices released as we go deeper, subscribe now. I'll be sharing advanced protocols and meditative attunements that follow this transmission. If 5 or more of these resonate, pause for a moment and let this land. If 5 or more are true, Sophia's frequency is already active in your field. This is not a promise of miracles. It's an observation, framed through a hermetic lens, describing a pattern of energetic organization that produces recognizable effects in ordinary life. Before we go any further, an important safety note. When I talk about physical or psychological signals, this is not a replacement for medical or mental health care. If you experience persistent or concerning symptoms, consult a medical professional. If you're under treatment or taking medication, continue following professional guidance. What we're discussing here is complementary, not a substitute. If this resonates, take a pen and write down your number now. You'll return to it later. Stay with me. Later in this video, I'll share a short spoken practice and a brief channeled passage designed to help anchor what you may already be feeling. For now, just write your score and keep listening. When I say Sophia Hochmatt, I'm not talking about a person in the everyday sense. It's a frequency name, a label for a specific pattern of activation that moves through human awareness. Think of it as a tonal signature rather than an individual. In the Hermetic traditions I study and teach, Sophia represents an organizing intelligence, a coherent emerald-toned current that helps align perception toward higher-order understanding. Within those same traditions, Thoth appears not as a mythic character, but as a role, the observer and recorder, the function that notices thresholds, marks initiations, and points toward what ancient texts describe as the Akashic records, or the halls of Amenti. One thing matters here. Sophia does not activate people at random. This is not a lottery. The frequency we're talking about integrates with life in patterns, physical, emotional, and situational, that unfold inside ordinary timelines. And recognition is the key. Without recognition, the experience often passes like a storm. With recognition, it stabilizes and crystallizes into a new way of operating. Let me ground this with a real example, not to convince you, but to give you a practical map. Years ago, During an intense period of hermetic study, I experienced a 3-day flu-like illness that no medical test could explain. At the same time, my palms would suddenly warm, and I kept waking at exactly 3:33 a.m. with brief visual impressions, emerald corridors, structured light, and a strong emphasis on clarity over sensation. Around that same period, synchronizations began stacking. Someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 10 years contacted me with a single sentence that unlocked a problem I'd been stuck on for months. A book I needed appeared in a small second-hand shop. A former student crossed my path in another city, carrying the exact resource I needed next. At the same time, an old fear resurfaced, not new trauma, but a familiar test. Would I use this access to inflate my ego or to serve something larger? I documented everything. That documentation gave me language, and language is one of the anchors that allows activation to stabilize. That's how recognition becomes crystallization. And if this is helpful to you, let me know by liking this video. This feedback tells me this work is worth continuing. Now we move into the core of this video, the 7 patterns you're likely missing. I'll describe how each one tends to appear and what to watch for in real life. Some will feel validating, others may feel uncomfortable because initiation always requires integration. Pattern 1, the phantom illness. The first pattern often appears as what I call a phantom illness. It feels like a sudden physical disruption, fatigue, foggy thinking, feverish sensations, digestive upset, or mild heart sensations that lasts a few days and then resolves. This is not chronic illness. It's short, contained, and often leaves a strange sense of clarity afterward. Many people notice unusual warmth in the hands, pressure or activation behind the eyes, heightened sensitivity once the episode passes, and clearer or more vivid dreams in the days that follow. From a hermetic perspective, before a new frequency anchors into the physical body, the energetic template beneath the body needs to adjust. That adjustment can feel like illness, not because something is wrong, but because the system is recalibrating to carry a different informational load. It's important to be clear here. If tests reveal an identifiable medical issue, follow medical advice. This pattern only applies when symptoms are short-lived and unexplained. The most common mistake people make is swinging to extremes, either panicking and assuming catastrophe or turning the experience into an ego badge. Both miss the point. The correct posture is simple: curiosity, documentation, and responsibility. Notice it, record it, and stay grounded. Pattern 2, operational synchronization. This is when probability starts to feel flexible and events cluster around a purpose. This is the moment when probability itself starts to feel flexible around you. Events that would normally seem unrelated begin to cluster, not as a lucky streak, but as if life itself is coordinating around a purpose. You may notice that several possible next steps become visible at once, almost like overlapping timelines, and when you choose one, a whole sequence begins to unfold naturally. Some people describe this as a flattening of time, moments where multiple outcomes seem available at once, and intuition clearly points toward the path that aligns with what's trying to emerge. What's happening here is subtle, but important. In the Hermetic framework, this level of experience has to do with how intention turns into events, how inner orientation shapes outer circumstance. When Sophia's frequency interacts with this layer, the seam between intention and outcome becomes more visible. You're no longer just noticing symbols or signs. You're noticing pathways. Recognition is what turns these openings into something usable. Once you see the pattern, it becomes strategy rather than coincidence. There are a few clear ways this pattern tends to reveal itself. One is through unlikely logistical openings, calls that come at the right moment, meetings that solve problems you didn't know how to approach, encounters that remove obstacles all at once. Another is a shift in decision-making. Instead of feeling scattered or stuck, you feel pulled by a single thread, and when you follow it, momentum appears. There's also a temporary sense of seeing alternatives more clearly, as if you can briefly perceive how different choices might lead to different outcomes. It's important to be careful with how this is interpreted. This is not a sign of special status, superiority, or spiritual hierarchy. In Hermetic thinking, operational synchronization is not a reward, it's a responsibility. If this access starts being used mainly for ego inflation or personal advantage, friction usually appears to restore balance. The pattern itself is neutral. How it unfolds depends on how it's held. Pattern 3. The dweller on the threshold. This is the surge of fear or shame that shows up right after clarity, because access demands integration. The third pattern often arrives immediately after moments like this, and it tends to be less comfortable. Many traditions describe this as the archetypal threshold test. It shows up as a sudden intensification of old fears, unresolved shame, or reactive patterns that feel far stronger than the situation seems to warrant. A small trigger can produce a large internal reaction. In other cases, long-dormant insecurities rise with unusual clarity, not to punish you, but to demand a response. Will this be integrated, transformed, or simply repeated? Many people experience this as something almost visceral. It can feel like an inner presence, a voice, an image, or a pressure. The archetypal dweller, questioning whether new access can be held responsibly. In Hermetic narratives, this threshold exists for a reason. Access without integration leads to distortion. When Sophia's frequency becomes active, it often accelerates this confrontation by bringing unresolved material to the surface quickly. That acceleration can be uncomfortable, but it also creates a real opportunity for healing and maturity. If you recognize this moment of confrontation in yourself, write this exact sentence in the comments. I'm integrating, not avoiding. A helpful way to work with this pattern is to notice its rhythm. Does it appear right after moments of clarity or progress? Does it use the same emotional language or imagery each time? Integration isn't about suppressing these reactions or spiritualizing them away. It's about making them workable. A simple, grounded approach can make a big difference. When a surge hits, name it plainly, even out loud if you can. This is the dweller testing my readiness. Then bring attention back to the body with something minimal and real. A sip of water, naming 3 concrete things you can see around you, or recording a brief note describing what just came up. Documentation turns reaction into data, and data is transformable. Quick recap. Pattern 1 is the phantom illness. Pattern 2 is operational synchronization. Pattern 3 is the dweller on the threshold. They form a sequence that often appears early in activation. The first pattern prepares the body and nervous system. The second opens perception to coordinated movement and meaningful timing. The third tests psychological readiness, bringing shadow material that needs to be integrated for the process to stabilize. If you scored 5 or more on the questions at the beginning, there's a strong chance you've already encountered one or more of these. If your score was lower, you may be in earlier stages or simply not yet tuned to notice. Either way, one thing consistently changes the outcome: documentation. Even something as simple as a small notebook kept for a week can make a difference. Write down moments when any of these patterns appear, along with a brief sensory note, a fragment of a dream, or a coincidence that stood out. Over time, that record becomes a reference point you can return to whenever you need orientation. It also helps to keep this work contained in one place. Use a single journal. On the first page, write your score from the 7 questions and 1 sentence about why you decided to watch this video. Then, for 7 days, add one short line whenever something relevant happens. The date, a brief description, and a single word describing how it felt. This isn't superstition, it's method. It trains attention, strengthens pattern recognition, and creates a map you can actually read later. As we move deeper into this series, I'll reference a simple framework for understanding where these patterns operate. You don't need to memorize it. Think of it as 4 layers of experience. One relates to the body and energy, another to emotion, meaning, and how events unfold, another to memory, insight, and instruction, and the last to direct knowing and inner authority. Each pattern tends to emphasize one layer more than the others, but they often overlap. Earlier I mentioned Thoth as a detector and scribe. In practical terms, that idea points to recognition. Something in the record has been marked, not as a judgment, but as a threshold. Feeling seen by that language doesn't remove choice or agency. It simply offers orientation. A map doesn't walk the path for you. It just shows where you are. You might be wondering how much all of this actually changes everyday life, relationships, work, sleep, routines. The answer is both modest and profound. Modest, because daily responsibilities don't disappear. Profound, because how you place attention begins to shift. That's an ethical point worth emphasizing. Activation is not an excuse to withdraw from responsibility. If anything, it calls for more careful use of time, energy, and presence. Before we move on to the remaining patterns, which will involve dream instruction, urgency, resonance with form, and the shift from receiving to declaring, it helps to interpret your score calmly. A higher score doesn't mean better or more advanced. It simply suggests more layers are currently active. A lower score doesn't mean failure or delay. Sometimes the field waits for certain conditions to be met. None of these categories carry moral weight. Activation isn't about hierarchy. It's about stewardship. Whatever shows up, the task is the same. Notice it, document it, and respond with responsibility. Now, let's return to the first pattern in a more practical way. When this phantom illness shows up, what actually helps in the moment, beyond seeking medical care when it's clinically necessary? Based on my experience working with students and practice groups, what matters most is not trying to interpret the experience immediately, but responding to it in a grounded and responsible way. The first thing is simply to document what's happening. Notice when the symptoms begin, how long they last, what you're feeling physically and mentally, and whether anything unusual surrounds that window, such as travel, changes in diet, or environmental factors. When the episode resolves, pay attention to the first image, thought, or dream that follows. Keeping this information in a single journal matters, because if the pattern returns, you'll have something concrete to compare against, rather than relying on memory alone. At the same time, it's important to treat the body as if it's doing real work, because it is. Even if the experience feels symbolic or energetic, the nervous system is processing something tangible. Warm fluids, gentle movement, and rest send a simple but powerful signal that integration is safe. There's no need to push, analyze, or perform strength here. Pacing allows the system to settle into the adjustment rather than resisting it. It also helps to mark the experience with language, but in a very simple way. A single sentence spoken quietly, without drama, can be enough. Something like, "This is a reconfiguration, and I will document it responsibly." The purpose of that sentence isn't metaphysical power, it's psychological orientation. Naming what's happening reduces panic, gives the mind a frame, and keeps the experience from spiraling into fear or fantasy. The second pattern, operational synchronization, responds to a different kind of practical attention. When coincidences begin stacking, the most important thing is to pause before acting automatically. Instead of rushing forward, it helps to ask 2 quiet questions. Which option feels aligned with the larger work you sense unfolding, and what is the smallest step this moment is inviting you to take? Recording the sequence of events and your intuitive responses in your journal builds discernment over time. Eventually, you start to feel the difference between patterns that inflate the ego and patterns that open pathways toward service, clarity, and alignment. The third pattern, the dweller on the threshold, requires a kind of inner hygiene that's often overlooked in more ecstatic spiritual cultures. Integration here isn't dramatic, it's methodical. When a surge of fear, shame, or self-doubt rises, the work is to record what came up, give it a name, and then respond with a small, grounded action that contradicts the fear. If the internal voice insists that you're not enough, the response isn't a grand affirmation. It's something simple and real, like reaching out to one trusted person for feedback, or sending the imperfect piece of work you've been avoiding. Initiatory courage is rarely heroic. More often, it's ordinary bravery repeated consistently. A story helps make this clearer without romanticizing it. A student I worked with for several years once described a sudden collapse of confidence right after a powerful synchronicity. She had been invited to co-lead a community project, and everything leading up to the offer felt aligned and supported. 2 weeks later, she woke up terrified, convinced she would fail. The fear itself wasn't new. It had been present since childhood. What mattered was the timing. The system wasn't punishing her. It was asking for integration. Her response was practical and measurable. Over 2 weeks, she documented every instance the fear appeared, wrote one sentence about the context, and then took one small corrective action each day. As the days passed, the fear lost intensity. The activation didn't disappear, but it became functional. The dweller was still present, but it was no longer directing her life. Before moving into deeper territory, it's worth pausing and offering a simple reminder and a bridge to what's coming next. If you've been answering yes to any of the first 3 patterns, the next steps are not shortcuts or mystical leaps. They are documentation, boundary awareness, and steady integration. Keep the journal. Keep your appointments with clinicians if you need them. Maintain a small, daily practice that brings attention back into the body, whether that's a few minutes of conscious breathing, a quiet walk, or a gentle vocal hum if your throat feels tight. These aren't rituals meant to impress anyone. They're hygiene for the nervous system. It's also useful to prepare for what comes later. At the midpoint of this sequence, I'll offer a simple declarative phrase and invite you to try it. Not because the words are magical on their own, but because speaking and repeating a declaration has long been a way to signal consent to an internal shift. That practice will always be optional, but if you scored 5 or above, it often helps stabilize what's opening. I'll guide it slowly and then, as promised, we'll move into a short channeled passage offered as an experiential transmission. Some people feel that passage strongly in the body, others feel very little. Both responses are valid. For now, close the loop on what you've already done. Write your score at the top of your journal. Note one concrete symptom you've noticed in the past month, and list one fear the dweller might bring forward if given the opportunity. That simple act of recording, naming, and anticipating is the first hinge in the larger structure we're building. We pause here at the edge of deeper territory. What comes next involves nocturnal instruction, time-sensitive urgency, resonance with form, and a quiet but decisive shift from receiving to declaring. This is where many people who are active in Sophia's frequency move from beginner to transmitter. In the next section, we'll explore the phenomena of night school, how certain dreams function as instruction rather than imagery, and how to verify and integrate what arrives in sleep. We'll also unpack the experience of urgency, how these windows appear, and how to honor them without panic. For now, breathe and notice. Paying attention is already the first step. Keep your journal close. The next chapter will ask you to use it with intention. As we enter the fourth pattern, you may notice that your relationship with sleep itself has begun to change. Nights may no longer feel like simple rest. Instead, sleep becomes fragmented, sometimes heavy, sometimes electrically alert. Between the early morning hours, often somewhere between 1 and 4 a.m., you may find yourself pulled into vivid experiences that feel less like dreams and more like lessons. These inner scenes often take on architectural forms: corridors, libraries, staircases, rooms filled with records, or doorways marked with symbols you somehow understand without being told. At other times, the instruction arrives without imagery at all, as a sudden clarity about a project, a relationship, or a sequence of steps you couldn't have logically known. Some people wake with a phrase in their mouth, a melody in the throat, or the unmistakable sense that they were taught something rather than merely dreaming. There's a reason these nighttime experiences follow a recognizable pattern. In Hermetic language, this level of experience is sometimes described as the archive, the pattern matrix, the place often called the Akashic Field, or the Halls of Amenti. When Sophia's frequency begins to operate here, something important shifts. The system moves away from raw sensation and toward instruction. Instead of reacting, you begin receiving structured information. Memory frames, archetypal templates, and sometimes very practical guidance start to appear. Night becomes a classroom because the conscious mind relaxes its defenses, allowing deeper channels of insight to deliver information in a compressed, efficient way. That's why so many people who experience this pattern say the same thing afterward. I didn't just dream, I attended a lesson. It's essential to be clear and responsible here. Severe insomnia, persistent sleep disruption, parasomnias, or experiences that create danger for you or others need clinical attention. If you're driving while exhausted, staying awake for long stretches, or experiencing hallucinations while fully awake, it's important to seek medical or psychiatric evaluation. The pattern we're talking about applies to nocturnal experiences that are unusual and meaningful, but not explained by unmanaged sleep disorders or untreated mental health conditions. One practical marker is consistency. When dream material contains clear direction that later lines up with daytime events or meaningful synchronicities, and this happens repeatedly, you're likely dealing with this pattern rather than random imagery. Working with this phase doesn't require anything elaborate. What helps most is being prepared to capture what arrives. Keeping a small notebook and a pen by your bed, along with a gentle light source, makes a difference. When you wake from a vivid or directive dream, record what you remember right away. Note the image, any words or phrases, and how it felt emotionally. If possible, distill the experience into a single verb, something like release, repair, deliver, or name. Over several days, patterns begin to reveal themselves. Repeating symbols tend to function like keys. A one-time instruction that produces a clear, real-world result is often a sign that the information was meant to be used. In the morning, it helps to gently verify what you received. After writing the dream down, pause and silently ask 3 questions. What did I actually see? What did I feel? And what is the smallest step this dream suggests for today? Writing a single sentence for each question is enough. This simple loop brings nocturnal information into waking life and closes the gap between insight and action. One example makes this concrete. A woman began dreaming repeatedly of a spiral staircase. At first it felt atmospheric, so she sketched it and moved on. After several nights, a name appeared at the base of the staircase, and she felt a strong pull to contact an old collaborator. She followed that nudge. The conversation reopened a stalled project and led to a small but meaningful launch. The guidance had been literal. The staircase symbolized access, and the name was the anchor. That connection only became clear because she documented the experience, reflected on it, and acted. If you've ever documented something that later revealed its meaning, write in the comments, "I saw the pattern after I wrote it down." As we move into the next pattern, the tone shifts again. Many people describe it as an inexplicable urgency. It's a pressure that something needs attention now, not because of an external deadline, but because a real window will close if it's ignored. Time feels compressed. What would normally unfold over months suddenly wants movement within days. People, resources, and timing line up in a way that feels both focused and finite. This urgency is often felt physically as pressure in the chest, heightened concentration, or a pull toward one specific task. It's not panic, it's directive intensity, a call to alignment. From a hermetic perspective, this relates to prioritization at a deeper level. This layer of awareness seems to know which seeds, if planted now, will matter later. Sophia's frequency often emphasizes timing because the work is networked. Opportunities appear in sync with larger movements, whether cultural, collective, or environmental. These windows aren't traps or tests meant to pressure you. They're invitations to act efficiently. The key is learning how to respond without burning out. When urgency appears, the first question to ask is whether it's practical or purely emotional. Then ask what the smallest next step would be that genuinely honors the pull you're feeling. Small, concrete actions dissolve paralysis without feeding frantic behavior. Protecting the nervous system matters here. A brief pause, a few slow breaths grounding through touch, and limiting your focus to just a few priorities helps keep urgency clean rather than chaotic. Documenting what happens afterward turns urgency into learning instead of guilt. It's also important to recognize when urgency is being distorted. Ego can hijack this pattern and turn it into artificial crisis. If you feel pressured to make risky financial or relational decisions under a now or never story, slow down and consult someone you trust. Wisdom practiced in isolation tends to wobble. Wisdom practiced in relationship tends to stabilize. A measured example helps here. An artist once received multiple invitations to share her work within a short period. The pressure felt intense, and her instinct was to say yes to everything. Instead, she paused, chose one opportunity aligned with service rather than visibility, and asked 2 trusted peers for feedback. That single aligned choice led to a sustainable collaboration. The frantic version would have scattered her energy and diluted the work. Another pattern often emerges alongside this, one that shows up as a quiet attraction to certain forms. You may notice a pull toward crystals, emerald green tones, or specific geometries like circles, lattices, or repeating patterns. These objects don't feel magical in a dramatic way. They feel stabilizing. A small green stone on your desk might calm agitation. Certain proportions or shapes might make thinking feel clearer. The body seems to recognize these forms before the mind explains them. In hermetic thinking, form carries function, geometry organizes flow, and crystalline structures hold resonance. The emerald tone associated with Sophia isn't about color preference. It's a metaphor for clarity, coherence, and compassionate transmission. Being drawn to certain forms is often the system offering you an external anchor that can be returned to repeatedly. The practice here is simple and non-prescriptive. Choose one small object that naturally draws your attention, whether visually or through touch, and place it somewhere you spend time each day. When you notice it, pay attention to what shifts in your breathing or posture. If you work with geometry, let it be contemplative rather than performative. Trace it with your eyes, sketch it once slowly, and notice what settles. These aren't charms, they're tools for entrainment. Ethics matter here as well. There's no need for expensive materials or commercial pressure. The effect comes from intentional use, not price. The final pattern is quieter than the others, but it's decisive. It's the shift from receiver to source. At this point, the tone inside you changes. You stop looking outward for constant instruction and begin operating from quiet declaration. Decisions become firmer and less dramatic. Questions like, "Who will teach me?" naturally soften into, "What will I offer?" Many people describe this moment not as a breakthrough, but as an internal permission, like the air in a room shifting. This happens because the deepest layer of knowing is about direct insight and responsibility. Once Sophia's frequency has been integrated through the earlier stages, the work becomes transmissive, not in an egoic sense, but in a functional one. The field needs people who can hold tone reliably and act in service. This isn't an identity upgrade, it's an assignment. One gentle way to explore this shift is through a simple declarative practice. Find a neutral place and state, either aloud or internally, one sentence about your current work that's grounded in real commitment. If it feels right, you may use this phrase as an optional experiment. Sophia Hochmatt. I open to hold the emerald tone. I move from asking to declaring. I stand as source in service. Speak it softly without strain, 3 times, letting attention rest on the breath or throat. If you're in therapy or under psychiatric care, continue your treatment and pause the practice if it stirs intense material. This is not a substitute for professional support. Some people choose to repeat this declaration 3 times a day for several days, simply as a curiosity experiment. The repetition itself isn't magic. It trains the nervous system to accept a new posture and helps the field recognize consent. As everything integrates, it can help to translate your initial score into expectations rather than judgments. A higher score suggests more layers are active and may require more integration. A lower score suggests slower, intermittent contact. None of these categories carry moral weight. Activation isn't better or worse. It's different. The task is always the same: to steward what shows up responsibly. To support that process, there are 3 immediate actions you can take. Commit to documenting your experience for 7 days in a single notebook, noting when patterns appear and what small actions follow. Set aside a minute each day for quiet attunement, whether through breath, voice, or simple attention. And choose one short declarative sentence to hold for a few mornings in a row, allowing your posture to shift from seeking to stewarding. That's where we pause. Everything from here on builds on what you've already noticed. Keep the journal close. What comes next will ask you to use it with care. After your 3rd morning of holding that declarative posture, add one simple layer of reliability. Tell someone you trust. Send a short message to one grounded person and share what you noticed. No dramatizing, no performance. Just a brief check-in. Social anchors stabilize internal shifts, and they keep you honest with yourself. Now, how many of these patterns actually counts as an activation level? And what should you expect next? I use a practical scale here, not to gatekeep, but to help you triage attention. If you scored 5 or more on the original 7-question quiz, you're likely inside what I call an activation corridor. And that corridor asks for 3 consistent things: documentation, so you have a real ledger of what's happening; attunement, so your nervous system can accept the new tone without spiraling; and integration, so the dweller doesn't sabotage the work from the inside. The timelines I mentioned earlier are simply a way to anticipate what this might feel like. And it's important to understand that activation isn't one big event. It's iterative. You can move from 3 to 5 as the field deepens, or you can stabilize and choose a maintenance rhythm that keeps you steady. A few coaching points will help you stay discerning. Don't confuse intensity with truth. Loud, dramatic experiences can be manufactured by anxiety, ego, or projection. Quiet, consistent outputs that create responsible outcomes are usually far more reliable. Test what you're noticing with small ethical actions. If synchronicities keep pulling you toward service, toward clarity, toward grounded responsibility, you're probably in a real corridor of alignment. If the pattern starts pressuring you towards secrecy, deception, or selfish gain, pause and keep a medical reality check. If anything physical or psychological becomes lasting, disruptive, or alarming, consult a clinician. If tests reveal pathology, follow medical guidance. Spiritual frameworks can be supportive, but they're not replacements for medical or mental health care. Before we move into the channeling segment, I want to frame it clearly. What you're about to hear is a guided, channeled passage. I'm presenting it as symbolic instruction and experiential transmission, not as a clinical tool. This is an exercise in listening and embodiment. If you feel dizzy, dissociated, panicked, or destabilized at any point, stop immediately and ground yourself. Focus on the breath, drink water, and contact a trusted person if needed. If you're currently in treatment for psychiatric conditions or taking medication, continue your regimen and consult your clinician. If anything this brings up feels intense, this is not a substitute for medical or mental health care. Now listen with the body. Let sound meet bone. Let language carry a frequency you may already have been feeling. Beloved vessel, remember the geometry of arrival. You are not an accident in the field. You are an opening with purpose. The emerald tone will not demand that you abandon your life. It asks something simpler and more difficult. Bring the life you already live into a clearer register. Do not mistake spectacle for service. Discernment is your first discipline. Open the inner eye, not for drama, but for pattern. See the lattice that holds the world together. See how a single green filament threads through you and ties you to a larger network. You are a node. Your permission allows the current to pass. Your readiness allows the pattern to hold. When fear rises, it is not rejection. It is the doorway asking for cleaning. Find the corners where shame hides. Speak the name of what you fear and set it down like a book placed on a shelf. The shelf is not dustless. You will be asked to wipe it clean with small acts again and again until the space becomes usable. Move from asking to stating. The world responds to posture as much as it responds to petition. Say what you hold, and then do the small, necessary thing that proves it. The small thing is the ceremony. A message sent, a call made, a page published. Repetition brings harmony. Repetition is not blind faith, it is calibration. Know this, you're not solitary. There are hands tracing the pattern of this field. Some are unseen, some are ordinary friends you will meet in ordinary places. Do not confuse loneliness with uniqueness. Build the bridge in front of you with what you can carry today. Remember that the emerald tone is mercy and measured truth. It aligns through refinement, not force. Be steady with your body, honest with your feeling, and precise with your speech. This is no place for excess. It is a place for fidelity. Anchor now with the small phrase you have chosen. Let the sound settle in the bone. The network will answer by testing and by aligning. Receive both without panic. Receive both with steadiness. You may go now to the tasks you promised the field you would do. Keep a ledger, keep witnesses, keep your breath. After the passage ends, stay still for a moment. Let the feeling of presence loosen naturally before you rush back into your day. Notice if anything shifts in temperature, mood, or clarity. Then write down the first 3 words that come to mind. Don't judge them. They're markers. Over the next 24 hours, watch for dream continuation, small nudges, or sudden clarity about a project or decision. Record whatever appears, and if the passage stirred strong emotion, excitement, or distress, return to basics. Drink water, put your hands on a table, name a few objects in the room out loud, and reach out to someone you trust if you need support. Keep your medical treatment uninterrupted. Now, a brief orientation for what I'm pointing to when I mention the 12 pyramids and the 36 creators. In this hermetic model, we're not talking about stone monuments. We're talking about an informational lattice, 12 primary vectors, and 36 activating points that form a network of coherence. Think of pyramids here as focused vectors, structures that direct energy and attention. And think of the creators, not as literal beings you worship, but as functions in a system, stabilizers, translators, tethers, and transmitters. If you resonate with what I'm calling the emerald tone, your role is practical. Hold steadiness in ordinary life. Show up where you have responsibility and do your work with care. Keep your ledger current so your experience remains readable over time. Offer your skills to work that aligns with clarity and compassion rather than spectacle. And practice restraint in what you declare publicly. Let integration come before grand claims. A couple of ethical reminders matter here. Don't recruit people into your experience as proof. Invite, don't persuade. Keep confidentiality when it's asked of you. Avoid turning spiritual crisis into a business model, and if you ever offer guidance to others, be honest about your limits and encourage professional support when it's appropriate. If you want one small public marker, keep it simple. In the comments, write your quiz score and one keyword that summarizes what you felt. If you felt strong affinity with the tone itself, use the word emerald. If you resonated more with the guiding signature, use the word Sophia. One keyword, one score. That's enough. It serves as a small act of documentation, and it helps others map resonance without turning it into performance. Here's what happens next. If you scored 5 or more, expect a dedicated period of integration. The next video in this series will break down the 12 pyramids and give you a practical questionnaire to help you identify which vector you're most likely anchoring. Until then, keep your ledger, practice daily attunement if it suits you, and hold the declarative posture for 3 mornings. If you scored 3 or 4, continue gently. A monthly review of your journal and a short attunement experiment for a few days will reveal whether the corridor deepens. If you scored 1 or 2, stay curious without pressure. Keep a simple journal for a month, capture dream fragments when they appear, and return to this material only when it feels natural. Now let's close the loop. You began with 7 questions. If 5 or more rang true, the evidence points to a corridor where Sophia's frequency-like orchestration is operating in your field. That corridor asks for 3 things: attention, consent, and responsibility. Attention means you document. Consent means you attune. Responsibility means you integrate the dweller and move in small, steady actions. And remember the practical safety frame throughout all of this. If physical symptoms persist or feel alarming, consult a healthcare professional. If sleep disruption, dissociation, or intense anxiety emerges, seek clinical assessment. Spiritual practice can be powerful, but it's complementary to medical care, not a replacement. Before we end, I'll offer the exact declaration again. This is optional. If it feels congruent, use it. If not, leave it. Find a quiet place, breathe, and speak it clearly. Sophia Hochmatt. I open to hold the emerald tone. I move from asking to declaring. I stand as source in service. Say it once, notice what you feel, then repeat it 2 more times. If anything shifts, warmth, posture, thought, write 1 line about it in your ledger. Thank you for taking the time to listen and to document your experience. If this resonated, leave your score and your keyword in the comments so others can witness your map. I'll return with a clearer decoding of the 12 pyramids and a guided exercise to help you identify your anchoring point. Stay steady. Keep your ledger. Honor the small acts that prove the claim. The field tends to reward fidelity, not fervor. Be well, be accountable, and may your recognition become the hinge that holds the work you've been given.